My name is Laurien. I have a background in organizational psychology and statistics, and I have been with Shell's HR analytics team for over 2.5 years now. And next to me, we have George.
Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm George Surilas. I'm also part of the HR analytics team. I've been here for about 1 year. I have a background in data science, and previously I was working in finance as a data scientist.
Thanks. So what will we be sharing today? Of course, I will start with a very short overview of Shell's businesses and what role we as an HR analytics play in that organization. What are our ways of working and how do we create business value for Shell? And then we will share a few examples of some of our projects where we use a data-driven approach to talent management, and which of them use shiny new technologies such as machine learning or network analysis. But before we start there, let me share the most engaging slides you will see during this presentation, and I hope this will work. You need to double click. No, that's too far. That's way too far. Anyway, what you will see in the slides here is, I won't ask you to read it, but this is just to tell you to not base any of your investment decision based on what we will tell you in the next 30 minutes. So a little bit, because we're all about numbers, right? In Shell in 2019, we employed around 83,000 people, and we were operating in over 70 countries on a global scale. Shell is also a customer-focused organization, and we serve more than 1 million commercial and industrial customers and 30 million customers at 45,000 retail service stations every day. We are an international energy company with expertise in the exploration, production, refining, and marketing of oil and natural gas, and the manufacturing and marketing of chemical solutions. So what role does HR analytics play there? Our mission statement is to help drive employee engagement by providing actionable insights to the HR organization. And allow me to cite one of the outcomes of an extensive meta-analytic study done in over 30,000 organizations. So what this model suggests is that employee performance is a function of 3 essential components: ability, motivation, and the opportunity to perform. So HR practices designed to maximize employee performance can be viewed as a composition of these 3 dimensions. And what the study found was that those practices all contribute positively to operational and financial outcomes. Operational outcomes include the level of productivity, the level of quality of the products, the degree of service, and the degree of innovation, which is obviously very important for Shell. And the financial outcomes refer to measures like equity, return on assets, return on equity, and our sales growth. Our goal as an HR analytics team is to help the HR organization to become more evidence-based, such that when decisions are made around our policies and procedures, we can have a more informed and effective decision-making, a practice that is based on what works and not purely on what our gut will tell us that works. But we also believe that we cannot just simply replace those beliefs and intuitions that our experienced HR professionals have. However, we can support to strengthen the narrative or put boundaries on it. But without a story, analytics is no evidence. Historically, analytics in HR was mainly focused on tracking basic HR metrics or providing a manager with a headcount or attrition report. But currently, people analytics teams are more focusing on how data is used to understand every part of how it impacts the business and the operations. So it's becoming more important to understand why you see certain trends rather than just observing them. It's important to focus on what the business needs and how to make the connection clear between the data and the impact on the bottom line. As an example, it may not be that important anymore to know exactly how many people have left your organization. But what is important is How many of those were in strategic positions? How many of those were highly skilled? What was the maturity of their experience? What led to their exits? What's the cost of replacing these? And finally, how do all these events tie together to affect the company's profits? How do we approach an analytics project? It's very in line with the scientific method. We start by forming an hypothesis, look up what scientific research says about this problem. We collect data, etc., etc. Then we work our magic. And what is the most important there is to have the discussion with the business, because that's why and how we make our insights into actionable insights. So a bit on our data landscape. At the base of it all, we have our policies, procedures, our values such as transparency, and those define what kind of data we collect about our employees or contractors. Then we have two main sources of data. One is our primary data, our demographic, for example, Laurien, she works in The Hague currently. She's been with Shell for this amount of year. I won't disclose my age, female, etc. And then on the other hand, we have our secondary data, which is surveys and assessments, and those require specialized skills in order to be collected and interpreted correctly. And then on top, we have our MI and analytics layers. The demand within our organization in HR analytics is about 80% of the requests we get are actually very simple data and reporting questions, and 20% of our questions rely on analytics solution. Of course, a slide around data privacy. We do always make sure that what we do in terms of data storage and processing is in line with GDPR. And before we start any project, it does need a valid business reason to do so. And we have a pass by our data privacy bureau to make sure that everything we do is in line with local legislation. And when we report out, we always do so on an aggregated level and never on the individual level, just to ensure that there's never a negative consequence for any individual in Shell based on our research. A bit on our journey, and David has already spoken about it, that we started quite some years ago. A few of the highlights for me personally is all the way in the beginning in 2005, when there was a big HR data cleanup activity going on, which is now resulting in the fact that we have over a decade of trustworthy HR data, which is incredibly useful to us. In 2014 was the start of data scientists being hired in the team. And currently in 2020, our newest milestone is that we are starting to leverage cloud solutions for our analytics interventions. A little bit more about our how we divide the work. So a big chunk of it is what I already touched upon, is our reporting. So these are both periodic reports, but also ad hoc data requests that we get on a daily basis. Second big part is our diagnostics team. So those are the people that are very highly skilled in psychology. So they are the ones that do our surveys. One of them is our Shell People survey, is our annual engagement survey, and are also creating our assessments. And then we have our team. So the one that Georgia and I are a part of is the HR analytics team. And that is where we do in-depth analysis on people-related problems. And one of those problems is actually Project Spark. And this is was a project that we did to look for opportunities to improve sales performance in Shell. And this started as a project where we wanted to investigate the frozen middle in sales. So the people that were performing well, but not excellent. And we wanted to understand what the characteristics were of our top performance in order to action that. But this quickly became a more comprehensive predictive analytics project, where the goal was really to optimize our human capital. So what we did is developed an individual sales performance model and eventually used this to identify what key drivers there were for sales performance, how the levels of those drivers were leading to increases and decreases in the sales, and ultimately define a path to improve sales. We looked at many of potential drivers for here, and the intent was really to understand how they influence sales and utilize them to increase the performance. And one of them is organizational design. Do we see differences across channels? Does the type of role have an effect? For example, whether you're a key account manager or a business development manager? Does the diversity within the team play a role? Does your career type play a role in sales performance, whether you're a homegrown talent or an experienced hire, whether you have a deep expertise or whether you're a sales generalist? Do different learning experience drive higher performance? And then finally, one of the other elements we looked at is whether our sales KPI bonus system was effective in driving higher sales. Don't get scared for the statistical modeling. This is just to illustrate that for this project, we use hierarchical modeling. So that means that not all of our data was collected at the same level. So for example, we had data sitting at the employee level, for example, a score on a personality assessment or your sales outcome, but then several other metrics were aggregated at the team level or at a location level. And by using a hierarchical model, we could incorporate all these different elements and analyze the results. And then we also looked at models that had interaction. For example, does perceived leadership style play a role in the link between personality and your sales outcome? So if it does, then that relationship would behave differently based on the level of perceived team leadership. A few highlights of our outcomes. We did find a relationship with personality, and of course, personality research in the context of sales performance or performance in general is a hot topic. And yeah, that was also one of the things we looked at. And for this insight to be actionable, what we did is we asked all our sales employees to fill in the personality assessment that is currently being used in Shell as a recruitment instrument for our graduates, such that when we would find certain relationships, we could bring that into our recruitment process and use that insight for selecting the right individuals to join our graduate program. And another result that I wanted to highlight is the role of leadership, and we did find that leadership does play indeed a role. And how did we do that? So I already mentioned that we have an annual engagement survey. So we have data about how employees perceive the team leadership style. And even though it's completely anonymized on an individual level, it has aggregated answers on a team level. So in this way, we could bring this information into the model and analyze the role leadership plays in the sales performance model. And one of the key elements there was that giving feedback was one of the main drivers of sales performance. So now we have looked at a few examples of results. What action did this actually drive? And this plays a role in our LEAD program. So LEAD is a leadership development program that we have in Shell. We are lucky to have a great amount of good leaders at Shell, but we do have also a portion of repeat offenders. So those are team leaders with a low leadership score in the 1 year, but also in the next year. So a little over 50% will be one of those repeat offenders. And what we have is our LEAD program. So that's a leadership development program. So we give them the opportunity to develop themselves in their leadership scores. And one of the key elements where we focus on is giving adequate feedback to the employee, which is coming from Project Spark, which I just discussed. And with this, I want to hand it over to George.
Thanks, Laurien. Hi, everyone. So I'll be talking about some of the more advanced techniques in data science these days and how we're trying to apply them to our work here at Shell. So on the screen, you can see some of the big buzzwords, things like artificial intelligence and deep learning and neural networks. And these are very powerful tools, and I'm sure you're familiar with at least some of their applications, things like image recognition or like the recommendation systems when you're on Amazon or Netflix. But the question when it applies to people analytics is, are these techniques the fad, or are they the future of where things are headed? And I think it really depends on the applications, and oftentimes you need some very specific requirements for these techniques to work. Namely, you want many data points and also really strong computing power, which is not always available in an HR department. So what is our team's approach to these things? We're somewhere in the middle between the hate and the hype. So we believe in the potential of these techniques, but we're also careful in exploring and validating these approaches when we decide to use them. So we try to avoid things like black box models. Like Laurien mentioned earlier in the presentation, people analytics has moved towards wanting to understand the why of things happen. And black box models are often not so good at describing the why, since you just feed an input and you get an output and you don't really understand what happened in the middle. Another thing that we're careful about is that we want to make sure that any models we use aren't biased against minority groups. Sometimes if you're using historical data where bias might exist, by using a fancy model, a fancy black box model, you might just propagate those biases forward into future decisions. So we definitely want to avoid that. And speaking of decisions, we also want to make sure that when we do use these machine learning techniques, that they're not used to make automated decisions, that they're just one part of the decision-making process. And so if I can speak briefly about one of the applications that we've used machine learning in, is this, we called it the Requisition traffic light prediction model. And it was a model built for the recruitment team. So currently, when we want to source an internal position, the recruiters have to put a considerable amount of time and effort into actually finding suitable candidates. And they won't often know how much time and effort they're going to need to put in beforehand. And so what this model tried to achieve was by taking the position characteristics of an open role, so what department is that role is going to be in, how many years of experience are being asked for that role. By taking all these different characteristics, can we predict how many applicants we'll receive? And so by predicting how many applicants we'll receive, if we predict we're going to receive 100 applicants, then the recruiters can know that they might not need to put as much effort into sourcing this role, and they can direct their resources elsewhere. But if we predict a low number of applicants, then we will know that it might be more of a challenge to source this job. And a secondary kind of bonus from this analysis was that by understanding which roles might be hard to source, we might also get a good look into our skill pool health and understand which skills we might be lacking in. So if a job is difficult to source, it could facilitate the discussion about our skill pool strategy as well. And so this kind of just expands upon what I mentioned in the previous slide. So we're using the position characteristics of the roles to get a predicted number of applicants, and then using this number, we're dividing them into three categories. So the high supply, medium supply, and short supply, and that's the green, yellow, and red of our traffic light prediction model. And if I can go to the next slide and show some of the results. So as you can see, we used 7 years of data from January 2012 to January 2019 as our training data. So we have quite a bit of data, and then we used 2 non-consecutive months as our test data to make sure that our model was robust enough and able to capture any potential seasonality effects. And on the bottom left, which I think is a more important chart, you'll see the red and green lines. And so the red and green lines, they represent the actual number of applicants and then also the predicted number of applicants. And you can see that they follow each other quite closely, which is good. So it meant that our model had a high accuracy rate and was able to predict the number of applicants fairly well. And so with this model proving successful, the next step would be to embed it within the HR system. Now, another project that we have used some more advanced analytics techniques is a social network analysis, which I'd like to talk about now. So the social network analysis was done for the trading department. They were planning on implementing new ways of working, and they had tapped certain employees. They had tapped certain employees in their department as key employees that could help spread this information throughout the department. And so the trading department asked us to validate whether or not they had asked the correct employees, and also whether or not they had overlooked potential employees that could also be key players in moving these changes forward. So we decided to do a social network analysis to answer this question. So what is a social network? I think we're all part of one in some way or another, whether or not on LinkedIn or Facebook. So it's a group of people that have social ties. And what are the goals of a social network analysis? They're kind of threefold. So first, it's to gain insight into the network structure. So we want to understand how different people connect to each other, and to understand the spread of ideas and communication within the structure. So once we understand the structure, we can also see how ideas might flow from one person to another. And then finally, it's to improve communication within the organization. So once we have, step one and step two, we know the structure and we know how people can communicate, then we can start building strategies about how to improve that communication. And I think the two important parts of any social network analysis, you'll see on the bottom left, are the nodes and the edges. So in this example, Josh and Anne are nodes. So they're individual actors, but they can also be groups of people. They can really be anything. And then the edge, the line between them is an edge. And so that line signifies there's some sort of relationship between them. They might be coworkers, they might be Facebook friends, but there's something that connects them. And so what kind of nodes were we looking for? So if we look at the figure on the left or on the right, we can see two main clusters, a yellow cluster and a red cluster. And we can think of those as two different departments or two different teams. And so what kind of nodes are we trying to identify in these two different teams? One is a central node. So it's this yellow node with a yellow highlight. So they're people that are well integrated and well connected within their own sphere. So you can see on the right, this yellow node with the yellow highlight is connected to 7 other yellow nodes. So they know everyone within their own group. And the other node that we were looking for were these knowledge brokers. So they're these yellow nodes with red highlights. So on the right, you can see this node is connected to people both in the yellow department and in the red department. So they're kind of a bridge between two teams. So if you want to get information from one side to another, it might be a good idea to go to this knowledge broker, because since they know people on both sides. And so if we can look quickly at the results for what we outputted for the trading department. The one thing I forgot to mention is how exactly we identified how these employees were connected. So obviously we don't want to go through people's Skype messages or their emails, because that's an invasion of privacy. So what we did was we sent a very simple survey to the employees of the trading department. And we asked them, who are the 3 people in rank order that you most rely on to do your job? And then using these rank orderings, we were able to create this network where we can draw lines between employees and how well connected they are to each other. And on the left, you'll see the result of this analysis. And so the squares are actually people that the trading department or that identified beforehand as potentially influential employees that they could go to help spread the new ways of working. And as you can see, they made pretty good decisions, because those squares have lots of edges to other employees, so they're really well connected. So we were able to validate that they chose the right people. And then the circles, or at the larger circles, are employees that we pointed out that could also be potentially useful in the future, because they are also well connected employees. So I think I'd like to pass it over to Laurien to take us away.
Thank you, George. Just to end this presentation, if there's 3 key takeaways we want you to focus on in terms of what we have learned over the course of our tenure here to make a project at Shell a success, is 1, it's about collaboration. We definitely don't know everything about Shell's businesses, so it's really important to have the dialogue with these businesses to really understand the problems they are having and how you can help them. Second, it's about commitment, not just about approval from the leadership, but really to have their commitments to the project. And a third very important one is to focus on change management from the start from the project. So those are the three main things I would like you to take away from us, from our experience. I know we still have some time for questions, but if there's anything we couldn't get to, do not hesitate. We are both also on a social network or on just regular Outlook, so do not hesitate to shoot us an email. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laurien, George, thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions, actually. One from Mark. I think I can, he's great work. How do you get people approval to do this research with social media is not owned by the company? But I think you said actually you're not doing social media. You're looking at, you're doing active surveying of people, as you said. So, so maybe the question is, I love the guardrails you presented, George, around the kind of more advanced analytics you're doing in the AI. You know, what sort of involvement have you got from the Works Council and other employee representatives groups at Shell in helping set those guardrails?
Maybe I can answer that question. So obviously, if we do some new technologies, we do in some countries, we for example, Germany is always a tough one to get a worker council approval. But in essence, we really worked with the business to help them understand what the added value is there, and also to illustrate that there is no personal risk to the data privacy of the individual, and in that way we didn't really face issues there.
Yeah, but to be clear, you're actually not looking at passive data for that social network analysis. You're looking at active data from people to survey, and essentially people can opt in and decide whether they want to say who are the three people that they go to.
In this specific case, it was made very clear to what extent these results were going to be used in the trading organization, and people were absolutely allowed to opt out of the survey if they wished so. Yeah, that's what I thought. Good question from Lisa, actually, Lisa Casalato. Could you share something that changed as a result of your analysis? And obviously you've given several examples there, so feel free to let us know some examples there. Oh, sure, there's plenty. For example, I'm currently working on a graduate intake model that that really models with current inflow of graduates into a skill pool what the inexperience level will be in the future. Is there enough coaching capacity? And that's a really tangible insight that we give back to the businesses and tell them, like, hey, this is the max amount of graduates you can take up. Otherwise, you'll get yourself into troubles in the future. And last question from Nicole. I'm firing them out so we can try and get through them. Do you see a gap between the business experience and beliefs and then the research outcome? So I guess what the business expects you to find and then what you find from the research. And then if so, how do you tackle those differences? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I think that always kind of happens, right? Like, especially for people that have been in the business for a long time, they have certain expectations, and sometimes the data doesn't always play out how they expect. And I think the way we handle that is, if you remember Laurien's slide, is the discussion part of our analysis. And we take their feedback and we try to incorporate, their personal knowledge into how we analyze, but then we also try to stay firm in like what we are finding and seeing, right? We can't always agree, but we can try to find a way forward, and that's beneficial to everyone and to the company.
Well, Laurien, George, it's always fascinating to hear the work that you're doing at Shell and the team there. I think you, as I said, you're a bit of a flag bearer for the field in certainly in Europe. So thanks for joining us today and sharing your work. And enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.